Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. This is show 18. My name is Joe Nash, and I'm here with Zina Shevchik. We are both librarians at the Colonie Library. And what we do, if you don't know our show, we go down to our new bookshelf, and we go to our technical services department where they're processing all the new books. And I think I've said many times, we get about 100 or so new books a week. And we're going to tell you about some new books. So as usual, Zina will be going first. Zina?
Okay. All right. So I vowed to have one travel book every time we do this because we have so many travel books and so many different kinds of travel books. So this one is very attractive, called The Great Railway Journeys of Europe. And it's a beautiful book, gorgeous pictures in here of mountains that the rail journeys take you through, the towns in historic areas of Austria and Germany and France. And but it's much more than just how-to and where to go. It's also got the whole first part of the book is different aspects of train travel. There's history of train travel, not just European rail travel, but train travel in general and the growth of rail travel, engineering feats, building things like the tunnel that is between France and England, and the trains run fast, speedy travel between England and France now, and through all the mountains of Austria and Switzerland. And it describes what you'll see along each route. There's maps. There's suggestions for where to stay, what to see, when to go, and it really does glorify the great railway journeys of today in Europe. It shows some of the historic train routes as well, including like the Orient Express as well. So I think this is a beautiful addition to our travel collection, and for something new and different, a new way to see Europe, The Great Railway Journeys of Europe by Insight. It's the Insight Guides.
They have good pictures in them.
Yes, it is beautiful.
Did you ever take a long train trip?
No, my husband's been on a long train trip and he really enjoyed it, but he can sleep anywhere. I can't sleep anywhere.
I took a train to Denver and back a couple years ago. It was great.
Did you Did you sleep?
Yes, it was wonderful.
Okay, well,
my first book, as you know, this is the 150th anniversary of the Civil War starting. I think the word is, I'm not sure, sesquicentennial, is that
yes,
right?
Yes, I discovered that last week.
150. This book is called America Aflame, How the Civil War Created a Nation by David Goldfield. And this book, I have to tell you, as librarians, we read a lot of reviews. This book is getting really amazingly great reviews. I think the one-volume standard for the American Civil War is James McPherson's book, Battle Cry of Freedom. Came out in the 80s. Everyone always says that's the greatest one-volume Civil War book. And this book is, every review I read said this book is the best one-volume book since then. So, and it's a whole new, what I'm getting from it, I haven't read it, of course, but it goes from 1830 to the end of Reconstruction. And it's a whole new sort of interpretation of the Civil War because this author, unlike previous books, and of course I was just reading in some one of the reviews, there's something like 50,000 books about the Civil War. So you think, why do you need a new one? But this guy's thesis, not wholly original, but I think he goes into it more than anyone else has, was that the Civil War was caused, one of the main causes, which he goes into more than anyone else, I think, was caused by the infusion of evangelical Protestantism into the public sphere. So and this was also, because the book starts in the 1830s, the Second Great Awakening was going on, and I think all the things he talks about in here, slavery, westward expansion, things like that, all started to become infused with a moral sort of quality to it, and so the religions all got involved, and according to this guy, bloodshed was inevitable, and it's a whole new interpretation, but again, getting great reviews. Oh, he also, the other strand that goes through here is the Civil War made America a modern nation. At the end of the Civil War, industry started, things became more sort of scientific, and cities were growing, and things like that. So I don't know if you read any reviews of this, but
No, I didn't.
anyway, it's getting really great reviews. I know I said that a million times, but it's
That looks pretty
yes,
substantial. That
it's a
book.
long book. The other thing is that's kind of interesting. We tend to think the Civil War was a great victory for freedom and this and that, but this author, David Goldfield, says the Civil War is America's greatest failure. I think he goes into ways which perhaps he thinks it could have been avoided, but anyway, a new interpretation of the Civil War, getting great reviews, America Aflame by David Goldfield. Zina?
Would you say that there are more books written about the Civil War than anything else having to do with American history? And I would venture to say in our library more than any other
Yes, I would say yes.
historical event.
The Civil War books in our library take up a whole aisle, and both sides of the aisle. So people, if you know our library, it takes up literally two sides of an aisle.
It's a very popular subject both
Yes.
to read about and to write about.
It dwarfs our books about the JFK assassination.
Yes, there you go. All right, my next title is called The Natural Navigator, A Watchful Explorer's Guide to a Nearly Forgotten Skill. By someone called Tristan Gooley, and he is actually what they call a fellow. He teaches natural navigation courses in London at the Royal Geographical Society. He's led expeditions on 5 continents, climbed mountains in 3, and is the only living person to have both flown and sailed solo across the Atlantic Ocean. So by natural navigation, he's trying to bring it to the layman's level. He means by using the sun, the moon, the stars, by looking at nature and all aspects of nature. They talk about how what Boy Scouts are taught that moss actually doesn't only grow on the north side of trees. He talks about looking at today's natural navigation, which is the orientation of tennis courts in suburbs or in cities. He talks about the puddles, how puddles dry out, and you can ascertain direction from that. So it's actually written in a kind of folksy way. It's technical, but it's written in a kind of conversational tone, I would say. So it's something different. It certainly has illustrations. That's not dense. There's not a lot written on each page, and I think it's any person who's interested in the sun, moon, and stars, and just being much more aware of their surroundings. That's pretty hard to do it's hard to get away from even the sound of traffic or the light from cities, but this is a backward motion, in a sense, of going back to how things used to be and sharpening up your senses again. So, The Natural Navigator by Tristan Gooley.
Okay.
Joe?
Well, I'm not a big poetry reader. However, I do like listening to Garrison Keillor on the Writer's Almanac on NPR. At the end of that every day, he always reads a poem. And he's collected them in several books of all the poems he read on that. And the first one was called Good Poems, and the second one was called Good Poems for Hard Times. And this is the newest one, Good Poems, American Places. And these are all poems that he has read on the Writer's Almanac. It has a little bit of everything from Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson to all modern people, Billy Collins, people like that. But it's a big collection here. And it's sort of, I think it's interesting. sometimes I think when you're in high school or or grammar school, the way you have to analyze poems and everything makes you not like poetry.
Yeah.
So, it's funny in here. It says, let's see. It says, as Americans, we believe in second chances, and the Good Poem series is meant to give people who were unmoved in high school by Richard Cory's Untimely End and The Cold Plums in the Icebox, or The Guy in the Snowy Woods, I don't know, Robert Frost, with a little horse, a second chance to enjoy poetry. So, and what he's done, he's kind of got a theme here. He's called Good Poems, American Places, and what Garrison Keillor says here in the beginning is very simply, whoops, it's on the second page here. This is a book of poems in which the poet simply is carried away by a particular place in America. A canyon in Arizona, a town dump, the ballpark, the barber shop, the suburban backyard, Boulder Dam, Route 66, Bighorn Mountain, the lobby of the Algonquin, a cornfield in autumn, and on and on and on. And if like I say, if you know the Writer's Almanac, the poems are good. They're very interesting. Some are funny, some are sad, some are poignant. He's got them in little categories that, again, are very American, I think. The first section of poems, each section has 20, 30, 40 poems. On the Road, very American, Warm Summer, bunch of summer. The Place Where We Were Naked, several poems there, I'm not sure about those. City Life, 2 times 2 times 2, I'm not sure about that one. A Comforting Immensity, I think poems on big themes. A Sort of Rapture, On the Avenue, Snow, Out West, Residential, Good Work, Show Business, Ocean Brine, and the last section's called Never Expected to Be There. So, and I've been reading some of these. I had the book and I was just going to skim it, but I was actually reading a lot of the poems. There are really wonderful poems in here. So Good Poems, American Places, edited by Garrison Keillor of the Writer's Almanac.
He is fantastically quirky, and it makes him lovable. And
well, he chose the poems too, so the poems are kind of like him.
That's what I assume. So it must be. It's probably very, very fun to read. All right, my next book is a fiction, book, a new novel. That was one of the other things I wanted to introduce every time we do this book show as well. The Love of My Youth by Mary Gordon. Mary Gordon is a very well-known American author. She's living. She teaches at Barnard in New York City. She was named by Governor Spitzer the New York State Author. I guess they do that every couple of years. They bestow that title, New York State Author, on a deserving author of the state. Let's see, in the past it's been Russell Banks, Kurt Vonnegut, Peter Matheson, Norman Mailer, E.L. Doctorow, all familiar names to us New York Staters. I was surprised because I have known of her for a long time. She's been writing for quite a while, but I have never actually read anything of hers. So this sounded like something that I would enjoy. It's 2 people who were girlfriend and boyfriend in high school when they were 16. They had a falling out, I don't know, a few years later, and they go and live their separate lives, and they meet again in the city of Rome when they're almost 40 years later. And it's presented in a series of conversations between the two as they take walks in the city of Rome. They're each there for different purposes, one for family, one for business, and they're very unsure whether they want to renew their acquaintance. And their conversations I found fascinating, how they unravel by talking about all sorts of things, how they unravel what happened to them when they were young. And each chapter is divided by the place they're taking their walk that day. Sometimes it's a museum, sometimes it's a street, sometimes it's a park. And so they're interspersing discussions of art and architecture that they see, along with kind of sideways talking about their lives in the past and what has transpired in each of their lives since they last saw each other. So it's got really good reviews. She's well known, but I have to say I looked at the books of hers that we have in our collection, and they haven't actually been checked out and used that much. So I thought I'd promote this, The Love of My Youth by Mary Gordon, and maybe other people will discover her as well.
Well, lately she's been writing nonfiction, so that's why you probably didn't see the books.
Well, Final Payments, Pearl, The Company of Women, things that I had heard of and was aware of.
Yeah, she's a good writer.
But I don't know why I never picked up her books.
Her memoir about her mother called Circling My Mother is excellent.
And she also has a memoir about her father.
Yes, her father is very good.
She's known for those and for writing stories.
And she wrote a book. She wrote a book about religion too.
Yes,
but
she has a very
good writer.
Strong Catholic background.
She's known as a Catholic author.
Yes.
Well, my next book, now it seems like every show, Zina, every show I seem to have a little test for you. Little question. Do you know how many plays are attributed to Shakespeare?
Probably many more than he wrote.
Well, if you take the ones that he wrote and supposedly wrote with someone else near the end of his career, you come up with 38. So this book is called A Lifetime with Shakespeare, Notes from an American Director of All 38 Plays by Paul Barry. He was with the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, I think from 1965 to 1990. And he directed all 38 plays in the course of his career. He's directed over 300 plays, it says here. But the interesting thing about this book, which I was skimming, because I love Shakespeare, and I've seen myself, I was counting, I think I've seen 21 of the plays. Several, Midsummer Night's Dream probably the most. Everyone's seen that a million times. But this book is interesting because I guess if you read every Shakespeare play and wrote something about it, it'd be one thing. If you maybe saw them all, it might be another. But this guy directed all 38. So this really gets into, you know, the plays obviously are meant to be performed, to be experienced in the theater, not necessarily to be read. But so this guy really gets into all the sort of, what it says here, the theatrical complexity, and he has an introductory chapter about actors and staging and lighting in the theater. And like I say, the approach is a lot different than, because he directed them all. I'll just read you a couple little excerpts. I really like the way this guy writes. I'm gonna definitely check this book out when it's. But I'll read you a couple examples. This is what he says in the very beginning of A Midsummer Night's Dream. To become a member of the United Scenic Artists, the union representing scenic, costume, lighting designers, one must pass a very tough exam. If I were administering it, I'd assign A Midsummer Night's Dream, sets, costume, lights, sound, music, to all applicants. The play offers infinite opportunities and it's loaded with landmines. So then he takes off. Each of these is like 4 or 5 pages long, and the ones I was looking at, very interesting insight into all the plays. I'm going to read you a couple others because I find this interesting. And he's kind of critical too. This is what he says at the beginning of All's Well That Ends Well. All's Well That Ends Well is one of my least favorite Shakespeare plays. I've had 2 unsatisfactory experiences directing it. So then he carries on, but he tells you why. But I think he also says what can be good about the plays. 2 other things, 2 of my favorite Shakespeare plays, other than the very famous ones, I've seen a couple times, very seldom performed. I was reading these, and I'm going to just read it. Love's Labour's Lost, really a favorite of mine. And this is what he says in the beginning of this one. Please don't edit this play. Please, I beg you. It's a very special poetic gem, like a book of sonnets, but underrated, seldom performed. It is a great play. But anyway, and again, one more I'll give you. And I was amazed when I read this because I've seen, like I said, I've seen 21 Shakespeare plays. One of the best ones I ever saw is a very, not unknown, very seldom performed. It's called Timon of Athens. And what he says here is, I find amazing. The best production of a Shakespeare play I ever saw was Timon of Athens. And he took it back in 1963. And so that's the flavor of his writing. They're all seven, 8 pages. I think some of the famous, like Hamlet's 10 pages. So this is going to be on my summer reading list, because summer is the time for seeing Shakespeare in the park.
That's when you go, and that's also when you go, right?
Yes.
Don't you go in August or September?
Yes, I always
to
go,
this?
yes. But there's always Shakespeare around everywhere.
That's right.
A Lifetime with Shakespeare, notes from an American director of all 38 plays by Paul Barry. Zina?
Very good, very good. This is changing a bit direction. This is called Cairo Histories, plural, of a City. I'm going to butcher the name, Nizar al-Sayed. This is a kind of a biography history of the city of Cairo. I think I bought this book for the library when all the trouble started in Egypt a couple of months ago, the revolt against the current political system. I looked in our collection. I thought that we needed to put a little extra something in the collection, and this was the newest item that could be purchased, and I learned a whole lot about Cairo, and just by reading the reviews of this book and browsing through it. Al-Sayed is actually an architect, and he uses different buildings and plazas and tombs and pyramids in each chapter to start a history of a particular time in Cairo. Now, Cairo's been around as an urban area for centuries, some say millenniums before Christ. So he starts out with the city of Memphis, where I guess is just south of where Cairo is now, and he starts the story there with the Rosetta Stone. Cairo apparently is French for, French for vanquisher or the conqueror. It's the largest city in Africa and the 16th most populated metropolitan area in the world. It's such an involved history that he actually has a table within the first few pages of the book that describe in tabular form the history of the city as he's presenting it in this book. It has a lot to add to all of our knowledge about the Middle East and the history of Islamic empire. And I would recommend it to anyone who wants a better sense of what's happening in the world today. Cairo, Histories of a City by Nizar al-Sayed.
Okay. This is a book that was on our new bookshelf. It came out last November, but it's still on a new bookshelf. The last several shows we filmed, I was trying to get it, but it's always checked out. And in keeping with the title, and Zina and I are aging baby boomers, I had to ask her before we started filming, I go, did we talk about this book already? I couldn't remember.
Well, because her last book was I Feel Bad About My
Yes.
Neck. And,
This book is called I Remember Nothing by Nora Ephron.
Which is another beautiful thing about aging.
Yes, and she had a big hit a year or two ago with a book called I Feel Bad About My Neck. And as Nora Ephron, they're little essays, little humorous poems, little lists, little meditations on aging, being a woman, her being sort of overwhelmed by technology, which I have to agree with her on. And some of these are just very little funny little pieces, and it seems to be just like her other book, I Feel Bad About My Neck. Again, they're on all kinds of stuff. There's one on divorce, there's one on Christmas dinner, there's one, there's a series in a row called I Just Want to Say, and I just want to say the egg white omelet. I just want to say Teflon. I don't know why she's writing about Teflon, but I just want to say, no, I do not want another bottle of Pellegrino. And so there's a bunch of those. So you get the idea. If you know Nora Ephron, she's very funny, kind of serious too. And let's see, there's a thing in here. there's a little fun. There's a very funny piece in here called "The 6 Stages of Email." You should read. It's very funny. But I'm going to read this ending thing here because it's very short. The book ends with 2 very short poems. And the first one's called "What I Won't Miss," and the last one's called "What I Will Miss." And I'm assuming she means
after she passes away.
But they're very short. I read it. You get an idea of her humor. So this is called "What I Won't Miss." It's not really a poem. It looks like it's more like list. I guess you could think of it as a poem, but it looks more like a list. So it's either a list or a poem. So anyway, Nora Ephron, "What I Won't Miss." Dry skin, bad dinners like the one we went to last night, email, technology in general, my closet, washing my hair, bras, funerals, illness everywhere, polls that show that 32% of the American people believe in creationism, followed by polls, Fox, the collapse of the dollar, Joe Lieberman, Clarence Thomas, bar mitzvahs, mammograms, dead flowers, the sound of the vacuum cleaner, bills, email. I know I already said that, but I want to emphasize it. Small print, panels on women in film, taking off makeup every night. And then she follows this by "What I will miss." My kids, Nick, spring, fall, waffles, the concept of waffles, bacon, a walk in the park, the idea of a walk in the park, the park, Shakespeare in the park, the bed, reading in bed, fireworks, laughs, the view out the window, twinkle lights, butter, dinner at home, just the 2 of us, dinner with friends in cities where none of us lives, Paris, next year in Istanbul, Pride and Prejudice, the Christmas tree, Thanksgiving dinner, one for the table, I'm not sure what that means, the dogwood, taking a bath, coming over the bridge to Manhattan, and the last thing she's going to miss is pie. So Nora Ephron, some of these, are more serious, but this is her follow-up to "I Feel Bad About My Neck." It's called "I Remember Nothing." The title essay about her memory as she ages is very funny. So, "I Remember Nothing" by Nora Ephron.
Yeah, I'm glad you read the positive things after you read the negative things, because those negative things are, if you weren't already depressed about aging, it would want you to go out and ask to legalize euthanasia.
Stop.
Okay, this is an interesting book. It's called "Joint Ventures Inside America's Almost Legal Marijuana Industry." It's by Trish Reagan, who is the anchor of a CNBC documentary called Marijuana Inc. She's also, I guess, a business, her day job is as a business commentator on CNBC. So her perspective is not strictly the pros and cons of legalizing marijuana, but rather to bring to light just how much of a business growing marijuana actually is in this country, whether most people want to face it or not. There are laws in various states that make it legal to grow marijuana for medicinal purposes. There's all sorts of regulations, different levels of regulation in different states and in different counties about how people can grow and what documentation they need when they're growing marijuana for medicinal purposes. Excuse me. And she interviews people who actually are small-time growers legally. And in the Denver area, she concentrates in the first part of the book. I did not know that Colorado has very, what I would guess call liberal laws about growing marijuana for medicinal purposes. We all know from the news that California has those kinds of laws. But apparently California is a little less regulated than Denver. But her point is that it really is a huge industry, I don't want to say multi-billion dollar, but a thriving industry, and that the laws are so convoluted and contradictory between the federal and the government and the state governments, and sometimes the county regulations, that it's hard to know when you're growing or when you actually set up shop to sell marijuana for medicinal purposes in California. It's very hard to know the line you need to walk to stay within the regulations and laws. But she brings it down to everyday people's perspective by describing different people's jobs in the industry and how hard it is for them to actually make a living, but how in many cases in different parts of the country, if suddenly the laws, the most strict laws on a federal level were enforced, the economic situation of many areas and counties would kind of go bust. So it's something that's not spoken of much, apparently, and I really learned quite a bit from this. I had no idea, for example, that Colorado had such liberal marijuana growing laws. So, and it talks about New Hampshire. She talks about how her interest in it started when her mother, when she was a small child, when her mother actually visited someone who was dying of cancer and having chemotherapy, and how excruciating it was to not be able to help someone who was experiencing the side effects from cancer treatment. But she also talks to a certain extent about the benefits of using marijuana for pain management and many other diseases as well. So it's something different. Joint ventures inside America's almost legal marijuana industry. Joe?
Okay. This is the latest book. I think I've talked about some of their books in past shows. This is the latest book from the people at edge.org. Edge.org are leading thinkers in many, many fields. Edge.org is a great website. This is called Is the Internet Changing the Way You Think? Recently there's been a lot of books about the internet and brain how our brains work.
How they develop,
and now how they're developing within, using the internet. Now the internet's about 10 years old, and now suddenly after 10 years, all these books have been coming out. And the people on Edge are leading thinkers, like I said, in many different fields, such as, they got some of the stuff what they do here. These are people like Steven Pinker and Richard Dawkins and Nicholas Carr, Brian Eno, Sam Harris, Helen Fisher. These are all pretty famous people in their fields. And every year what edge.org does, they ask a question, and then they put them together in the book, and they got over 150 responses. And they're all short. They're all a page or two. And in the past, they have done, the other books were called What We Believe But Cannot Prove. Now, that was the question that many of these people answered. What is Your Dangerous Idea was another one. What are you optimistic about? What have you changed your mind about? And then last year's book was called This Will Change Everything, like, the one big idea. So anyway, the new one is the internet changing the way you think, and he goes out of his way to explain in the introduction, it's not is the internet changing the way we think? He's asking these people specifically. So I was skimming it. Very interesting book. It's got a wide range of people. Alan Alda's in here. Alan Alda does. He does all the science
on PBS.
But there's over 100 in here.
Okay, so he's asking how the internet has changed the way these.
No, the question is the internet changing the way you think?
Oh, okay.
And these people all answered. A couple are 2 or 3 pages. Most of them are 1 or 2 pages.
So they're not commenting on how other people think, but how it's affected them.
But I think he specifically, then he puts it all together.
Right,
so.
But that's interesting to see how it's affected different types of people.
And I just found what I was looking for earlier. These are people in fields such as, that I just mentioned, evolutionary biology, genetics, computer science, neurophysiology, psychology, physics, all fields. And if you've never been to edge.org, all these people write there regularly, and they have all kinds of articles. These are also the kind of people, if you've ever heard of the TED Conference, these are a lot of people that go to the TED Conference every year, leading thinkers in many fields. So this is their latest book, and we own all the other ones I mentioned.
Yeah, I remember on this show we talked about This Will Change Everything. I think you've talked about
this is the newer one. Is the internet changing the way you think? Edited by John Brockman. Zina, want to do one more?
Yeah. This is by the author of the bestseller well, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is, and it talked about how rich fathers taught their children different things about money than middle-class people knew or poorer people knew. And so this is by the same author, Robert T. Kiyosaki, Kiyosake, Kiyosaki. So the title of this is Unfair Advantage, The Power of Financial Education, What Schools Will Never Teach You About Money. Now, he's a economic finance guy who's very much a contrarian to the conventional thinking. And in the first few pages, he quotes Gene Shatsky, who is a commentator, financial commentator for the Today Show and Consumer Reports as well, and her advice to regular people and about finances, their own finances, is to live modestly, have a budget, open a 401k, save, pay off debt, work longer, retire later. Now he one by one points out how these things he thinks are wrong things to teach people about their own finances and how to deal with money all their lives. I mean, he doesn't think very much of 401ks at all. He is promoting people learning how not to work for money, but how to use money to work for you. And he's very much into investing, but not into the kind of investing the regular middle class kind of person might think about. He's all into financial education, learning about how markets work, and his goal is to make everyone think like a capitalist, an entrepreneur, in effect. So since Rich Dad, Poor Dad was such a big hit, I thought some people out there in the community might want to know about his new book called Unfair Advantage, The Power of Financial Education, What Schools Will Never Teach You About Money.
Okay, those Rich Dad, Poor Dad books are very popular.
Yes, they are.
All right, I'll go quickly. I got one left. I mentioned these two translators before when I was talking about a new Tolstoy. Well, not new. Tolstoy's a new translation of a Tolstoy book. So this book is both old and new, I guess I should say.
Oh.
It's a new translation of Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. I think he won the Nobel Prize. We all know the movie, very famous, but the book is supposed to be excellent, which I never read. But like I mentioned with the Tolstoy, the translators of this, Richard Pever and Larissa Volokhonsky, it seems like every time they do a translation of a Russian novel, and they've done all the biggies, they're continuing, they win the award every year for best translation. Their translations get, all the reviewers say, this is the best translation of this book, Brothers Karamazov or
So
whatever.
does it change the story at all?
No, I just think it just changes, if you've ever read something translated by two different people, you get a different. Supposedly these
Flavor.
guys, yes, the people that know Russian and know English say that Richard Pever and Larissa Volokhonsky's translations are the best. So here's the new translation of Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, and we will see you next time on So Many Books, So Little Time.